You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Joining us now, it's Lori Baker with the Association for Individual Development and the They Deserve More Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to have you on because you just got done with a committee talking about a budget issue that could be coming up, an issue specifically with the governor's budget proposal that has to do with direct support professionals and the hours that they have for the job. These are people that work with the disabled community in the state. They help take care of them. They help get through day-to-day life. Tell me a little bit about the proposal and what's wrong with it from the governor's office.
So the governor's proposed budget proposes cutting more than 900,000 service hours to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Those hours are to support them 24 hours a day in residential settings to live, work, love, recreate in their communities. And these are folks that need ongoing support to do activities of daily living. And if we cut 900,000 hours out of the service system from those people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, then they're going to be in danger of not being able to live effectively in their community.
There was a cut very similar to this one that almost went through last year. And I did some reporting on it myself. I talked with a lot of these organizations. The governor's office ended up pulling back on that particular cut to service hours. But both years so far, we've seen this cut be paired with raises to the wages of the DSPs in this specific area. And I'm just curious last year it was the wage increase came in the budget, and then later on in the year we found out about the potential cut. This year it seems to be paired together in this initial budget proposal. How is this developing right now, and was this part of the negotiation all along, or were you surprised by this?
We were surprised. The community didn't realize that there was going to be this proposed cut of nearly 1 million service hours to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the governor's proposed budget. In late 2023, this initial cut that you were talking about was proposed through the Guidehouse rate methodology implementation. That was about 2.5 million hours that they proposed. After lots of advocacy and lots of work from our legislators and others, they pushed back and they paused or froze that cut from going in effect, and then they fixed it. And they said, hey, beginning of 2025 here, we are not going to cut any of those hours. We're going to have them included within each individual who has intellectual or developmental disability within their service rate package. And then this shows up out of the blue in the governor's proposed budget. And so it's great that they put in a 50-cent an hour pay increase for DSPs. They deserve a living wage. They do a lot of hard work, but that wage does not offset the loss in hours for the people who are living in the community with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
You mentioned the Guidehouse study, and that was really a design that's designed around getting the state up to par when it comes to services for the disabled community. And at the time, I remember a lot of the talk at last year's cuts were about, there was a lot of talk about making the whole process more efficient. Less hours wouldn't necessarily mean less care was the explanation that was given, and a lot of the hours would be moved around to the people who need them the most, rather than maybe some in the community who didn't need that full around-the-clock treatment. And right. From somebody that works in the field, is it possible to move things around like that and make the use of the hours more efficient themselves when we're talking about a community that often does need additional services?
I think it might be possible if the hours didn't disappear. But what happened, instead of moving around hours to go have more hours for someone who has a higher service need and less hours for someone who needs less support, the total amount of hours in the system totally shrunk. And so that loss of those proposed at the time, more than 2 million hours, was saying the system has too many services in it. And we know that's not the case. We have all kinds of people that are waiting on waiting lists to be able to receive services. We have providers that can't hire people. And so we have DSPs that are working multiple hours of overtime, which are part of those hours that they're proposing to get cut for people. So I do believe that you could have made that argument about efficiency if you maintained the amount of hours that existed in the system from the beginning, but that is eyes on what happened.
This conversation, the hearing from this past week in the Capitol took place a couple months after the governor made this proposal. I'm curious what's happened in between. Here, has there been ongoing conversations between the governor's office and the coalition about maybe how to fix this, or has this been something that just hasn't really had any groundwork lately?
So there have been conversations. First of all, the system tried to understand what was really proposed, because the language that they used were not cuts, we weren't sure at first what was being proposed, and so we did clarifying meetings with the governor's office and with the Division of Developmental Disabilities. And once we began to understand that, yes, indeed, you're talking about taking back the very hours that you fixed in the system for this year, we began to talk about how we needed to let people know that. And every legislator that we've spoken to has been shocked that this was in the governor's proposed budget. They keep saying, didn't we fix this last year? And we're like, we thought so, but not so much. So it has been shocking. There have been conversations, and much of the conversation today at the hearing was about the guidehouse model, right? And they were going with the model of the way that they decide about services. And that was kind of the explanation, kind of going back to your right sizing argument from a couple years ago, right? There's been no movement to say that these hours should not be taken away.
So if cuts like this were to happen, these hours were to go away, what would be the direct impact? Would it be just a person having less hours with that professional in the room with them? Would it be some of these homes that potentially house multiple people with disabilities just not being there anymore? What is the potential impact?
It could very well be any of the things that you said. First of all, as professionals, we can't just leave someone who needs 24-hour care and go, oh, we're not getting paid from 2 to 4 p.m. to take care of you and support you. So in all likelihood, providers would attempt to continue doing that without really getting the funds to be able to pay that person to do that. And so we continue, as we always do, to raise money to fill in the gap, because it costs more than what we get paid to deliver the service in the first place. But that would make it even harder. Then beginning to put into danger specific homes, what we call CILAs in Illinois, community integrated living arrangements, where people, between 3 and 8 people share a house together and then receive services from those DSPs that are hardworking and deserve a raise, but not necessarily an hours cut for those people.
All right. Well, Lori Baker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate your interest in the story.
We'll be right back.